Now, this video that we're about to get into, it's important. It's going to show you why delineation is important and why Africa should have delineated. It's going to show you a story that you may not know about. It's about a kingdom in Africa that got written out of history. But the point is, it shows you how that kingdom disappeared. Have you ever heard of Mansa Musa? Have you ever wondered, how did he lose his power? Because you see, like the Queen of England, that family has been powerful for a long time. So it's going to show you the tactics used. And for those people that say, oh, we should all be together, it's going to show you they're still using those same tactics to weaken our people. Now our people have woken up and we're starting to see it. But the point is, look how powerful these people once were. Look at the tactics used that crippled them eventually. And it should help you understand. This is why we cannot have these people involved in our politics, involved in the decisions that we make. They shouldn't be involved in anything.
Imagine controlling more gold than any European nation. Imagine trading with China, India, and the Middle East while Europe was still struggling through its dark ages. Now imagine being completely erased from history. In the 1500s, there was an African empire so wealthy, so advanced, that Portuguese traders wrote back home in shock. They described vast trading networks, sophisticated political systems, and cities that rivaled anything in Europe. They called it the Kingdom of Mutapa, and they desperately wanted its gold. But here's what's strange. If you open most history textbooks today, you won't find it. If you search for great African civilizations, you'll hear about Egypt, maybe Mali or Songhai, but Mutapa? Silent.
And the reason you hear about Egypt is because Arabs love to lay claim to Egypt. The Songhai, they love to claim how they destroyed it. But they don't hear, or you don't hear anything about the Mutapan Empire.
So let me ask you something. How does an empire that controlled the gold trade for an entire region, that negotiated with multiple world powers, that lasted for centuries, how does that just disappear? The answer is darker than you think. This is the story of Mutapa, the golden empire they erased from history. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why they wanted you to forget it. Stay with me, because what happened to Mutapa explains a lot about how history gets written and who gets written out of it. Let's go back to the year 1430. In southern Africa, something remarkable was happening. The legendary city of Great Zimbabwe, you've probably seen pictures of those massive stone walls, was at the height of its power. But like all empires, things change. Some historians say drought, others say internal conflict. Some point to shifting trade routes. Whatever the reason, the people didn't just vanish. They moved. And from the remnants of Great Zimbabwe, a new kingdom emerged, Mutapa. The name itself means the plundered lands, or the great pillager. Not exactly subtle, right? The founder, Nyatsimba Mutoda, wasn't playing around. He expanded northward into the Zambezi River Valley, claiming control over something incredibly valuable, the gold fields of what's now Zimbabwe and Mozambique. Now picture this geography for a second. You've got rivers connecting the interior to the coast. You've got mineral wealth underground, gold, copper, iron. You've got elephants for ivory. You've got salt deposits. And you're positioned right between the African interior and the Swahili trading cities on the Indian Ocean coast. In other words, perfect. The Mutapa Empire sat at the crossroads of world trade. Gold and ivory flowed from the interior to the coast. From there, Swahili merchants shipped these goods to Arabia, Persia, India, even China. And what came back? Silk, porcelain, glass beads, Persian carpets, Indian cotton. This wasn't some isolated primitive society. This was international trade on a massive scale, centuries before Europeans showed up. But here's what makes this story even more powerful. The people of Mutapa saw themselves as the rightful heirs of Great Zimbabwe's legacy. They maintained the architectural traditions, the political structures, the spiritual practices. They built stone enclosures, they organized complex tribute systems, they maintained a sophisticated court with advisors, military commanders, and regional governors. This was a civilization with historical consciousness. They knew who they were. They knew where they came from. And that identity, that pride, that's what would eventually threaten European narratives. Think about it. If Africans could build complex empires independently, if they could organize international trade without European guidance, if they could create wealth and political systems on their own, well, that makes it a lot harder to justify colonization, doesn't it? Let me paint you a picture of Mutapa at its height. The year is 1500. The empire stretches from the Zambezi River to the Limpopo, from the Indian Ocean coast to the interior plateau. We're talking about a territory roughly the size of California. At the top, the Mwena Mutapa, the emperor. His word was law. His court was sophisticated, with officials managing everything from trade to taxation to military campaigns. Below him were regional chiefs who controlled smaller territories, collected tribute, and maintained order. And tribute? Let me tell you, it was serious business. Gold dust, ivory, copper, iron, cattle, grain, salt, animal skins. All of this flowed to the emperor's court and then redistributed through the system. This wasn't just random collection. This was organized governance. They had tax collectors, they had record keepers, they had diplomatic protocols. The economy ran on gold. Miners extracted it from the ground. Artisans worked it into jewelry and objects. Traders transported it to the coast. And at ports like Sofala, it entered the global market. Portuguese records from the early 1500s estimate that Sofala alone exported over a ton of gold per year. 1 ton per year. That's about 32,000 troy ounces annually, worth millions in today's money, and that's just one port. But Mutapa wasn't just wealthy, it was strategically brilliant. The emperor controlled access to the mines. If you wanted gold, you traded through Mutapa's terms. The Swahili merchants on the coast, they paid tribute to trade. Arab merchants, same thing. And when the Portuguese arrived, the emperor made them negotiate like everyone else, at least, at first. Now here's the question I want you to sit with. If Mutapa was this organized, this wealthy, this powerful, why don't we learn about it in school? Why is it that when people think African empire, they immediately think Egypt, then maybe Mali, but Mutapa is a blank? Leave a comment if you'd heard of the Mutapa Empire before this video. I'm genuinely curious, because what I'm about to tell you explains exactly why this empire got written out of history. In 1498, everything changed.
In 1498, as soon as that Persian ship came onto their land, they should have killed them. That's exactly what they should have done. As soon as they stepped off that ship and they wanted to have a conversation, they should have killed them immediately. Had they done that, that empire would still be here. Because who controls the gold now? Think about this. It's deep. Who controls Africa now? Because this is what doesn't make sense. The European countries have the strongest dollars, the strongest money. Yet, gold diamonds, copper. All this stuff is in Africa, and they have the weakest currency. So what makes a currency strong? Your military. That's it. Your military. So America has a strong military. So in turn, it has what? Now, Gaddafi was going to create a coin called the gold dinar, and he was about to ban his country from using the US dollar. This is why they killed him. They try to say it's over other things. America does not care about what country kills its people or does harm to its people. Look what they do to Black Americans. So that wasn't the reason. They try to show themselves as freedom fighters, and they're trying to fight against regimes that are doing harm in other countries to the people over there. America does not care about that type of shit. When you see America claim to want to go fight for freedom somewhere else, there's something over there that they want, just like the last time. Because the buildings that got knocked down over here, quote unquote, by Saddam Hussein. I mean, not Saddam Hussein. Excuse me. I forgot his name. It can't come to me right now. But the bottom line is, that isn't the country that they went and invaded. Those are two different countries. Most people didn't pay attention to that because they're Arabs. That's the racism in America. So they invaded Osama bin Laden. That's the name. So they went and invaded this country over oil. That's all it was. Back to the story.
A Portuguese explorer named Vasco da Gama rounded the southern tip of Africa and entered the Indian Ocean. For the first time, Europeans had direct access to the East African coast and to the gold that came from the interior. At first, it was just trade. Portuguese merchants set up trading posts at Sofala and other coastal cities. They wanted gold, ivory, copper, everything Mutapa was exporting. And the emperor? He allowed it, controlled it, taxed it. But the Portuguese wrote things down, and what they wrote is fascinating. One chronicler described the emperor as ruling a vast empire with great wealth and many vassals. Another wrote about sophisticated court ceremonies, military discipline, and complex diplomatic rituals. A missionary noted that the people were intelligent, with laws and customs that maintained order. These weren't primitive savages, not even by European standards of the time. But here's where it gets interesting. As the Portuguese accounts spread back to Europe, they created a problem. See, Europeans were already developing narratives about African inferiority, ideas that would later justify slavery and colonization. But these reports from Mutapa, they contradicted everything. So what did European writers do? They started adjusting the story. Some claimed that the stone structures of Great Zimbabwe must have been built by ancient Phoenicians or Arabs, because surely Africans couldn't build something so sophisticated, right? Others suggested that Mutapa's wealth came from outside influence. Still others simply stopped writing about it. You can track this in the historical record. Early Portuguese accounts are detailed, even admiring. But by the late 1500s and into the 1600s, the tone changes. Mutapa gets described as declining, primitive, in need of Portuguese guidance. The story of Mutapa wasn't just forgotten, it was rewritten. And once you rewrite the story, you can justify what comes next.
And you have racists that use these same excuses to this day. They say, why are all the African countries so messed up? Why is Haiti so messed up? Why are blacks in America in the condition that they're in? As if there isn't a system dedicated to keeping us from doing certain things. We have inventors right now that you have to search to find, that they won't tell you about, but when you look for them, they're there. It's annoying. And this is part of the reason that Black Americans are just focused solely on getting what we have to get, on consolidating our power and creating a force to deal with this evil political system that is currently in America. They use these same excuses to this day. So when you see somebody in America that is quote unquote in a position of power, you think they really control these cities? Or is it someone behind them? Because if they actually control these cities, they wouldn't stick to the same exact script. They have something in politics called lobbying, which is legal bribery. A lobbyist is a person that bribes politicians legally. That money comes from billionaires. So things aren't ever going to get put into play by the people. It's about the billionaires.
The Portuguese didn't conquer Mutapa with armies, at least not at first. They did something far more effective. They infiltrated it. It started with trade agreements, then missionary activity, spreading Christianity, gaining influence at court, then military advisors, helping the emperor fight his rivals. Sound familiar?
The same way immigrants didn't outright take over our neighborhoods. They put in Chinese restaurants, bodegas, things like that. And after a while, it got to a point where they had their own neighborhoods. And in places like Chicago and California, if a Black person was found walking through a Latino neighborhood, they got chased out or sometimes even killed. Sound familiar?
This is the playbook, the same strategy used across Africa, Asia, and the Americas. You don't invade directly. You make yourself indispensable. You create dependencies. You pick sides in local conflicts. You arm one faction against another. And then, when the dust settles, you're the one holding power. In the 1560s and 1570s, the Portuguese started playing this game hard. They backed certain regional chiefs against the emperor. They withheld trade goods until they got concessions. They positioned military forces near key gold fields. And when one emperor resisted, they simply supported someone else. In 1575, the Emperor Ngomo Mupunzagutu signed a treaty with the Portuguese. On paper, it looked like a trade agreement. In reality, it handed over control of the mines. It gave Portuguese traders exclusive access to certain regions. It allowed Portuguese military forces to station themselves in Mutapa territory for protection. The emperor probably thought he was being clever, playing the Portuguese against rival powers, using their military strength to consolidate his own rule. But he wasn't making an alliance. He was signing away sovereignty. And here's the thing. Once you let foreign powers control your resources, you lose the ability to govern independently.
This is how Africa has become so tribal. You see how their chief made deals with Persians instead of talking to his own people. Maybe they weren't from his tribe, but they were Black. So instead of talking to other Black men, you made deals with Persians, and it cost you in the end.
Your economy depends on their trade networks. Your military depends on their guns. Your political rivals know they can appeal to the foreigners for support. You become a client state. By the early 1600s, Mutapa was still technically independent. The emperor still sat on his throne. The court still functioned. But the real power, That belonged to Portuguese traders, Portuguese soldiers, and Portuguese missionaries who now controlled access to the gold fields. They didn't just take the gold, they took the autonomy. And here's what's really insidious. When you read European accounts from this period, they describe Mutapa as backward, as needing guidance, as benefiting from Portuguese presence. But think about what actually happened. A sophisticated empire that had managed its own trade for centuries, that had maintained diplomatic relationships with multiple world powers, that had governed a vast territory without European help, that empire was systematically dismantled. Not because it was primitive, not because it couldn't function, but because it had something Europe wanted. And once Europe took it, they rewrote the story to make it look like they were doing Mutapa a favor.
That's the same way the American government calls the five. The other day I said seven. A young brother corrected me. It's five civilized tribes. In all reality, when Indians saw those Europeans come onto American land, they should have killed them immediately. Instead, they expect us to celebrate Thanksgiving. They expect us to give thanks when you invaded our land, gave our people disease, and killed us and put us on reservations. Really? But at least the ones on reservations can get money from the government. But they don't make any use of that money because some of them have so many alcoholic problems, and they have white people as chiefs that became $5 Indians because the red Indians traded on the black Indians. And look where you are now, living on reservation ghettos.
Does that remind you of anything? Any other historical situations where powerful nations took resources and then claimed they were bringing civilization? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about it. The end of Mutapa didn't come with a dramatic battle. There was no final siege, no climactic last stand, no moment where the empire fell. Instead, it faded, line by line, treaty by treaty, decade by decade. By the mid-1600s, the emperor controlled less than half his original territory. Regional chiefs were making their own deals with the Portuguese. Gold mines were under foreign control. Trade routes bypassed the traditional centers of power. The emperor still had his title, the court still performed its ceremonies, but the substance? Gone. Historians call this informal empire, where you don't officially colonize a place, you just control it. You control the economy, the military, the trade, the diplomacy, everything that matters. And the genius of this system is that you can claim you're not colonizing at all. You're just trading, just advising, just helping. But the result is the same. A once independent civilization loses its ability to determine its own future. By the 1700s, Mutapa was barely recognizable.
It failed because they tried to make deals with Europeans. Europeans are some of the sneakiest, slimiest, lying people that you can ever get into business with. I'm not saying you can't do business with them. I'm saying when you do, be very careful. Very, very careful.
The Portuguese had established prazo estates, basically colonial plantations run by Portuguese settlers with African slave labor. The emperor was a figurehead, propped up when useful, replaced when inconvenient. The Golden Empire that once negotiated with world powers as an equal was now a footnote in Portuguese colonial records. But here's what haunts me about this story. It wasn't inevitable. Mutapa didn't collapse because of some inherent weakness. It didn't fall because it was primitive or uncivilized. It fell because a foreign power systematically dismantled it, and then wrote the history books to make it seem like it never mattered in the first place. The empire didn't burn in flames. It was erased, quietly, deliberately. And that erasure, That's what we need to talk about next. Here's the uncomfortable truth. History isn't just what happened. It's what gets remembered, what gets written down, what gets taught. And Mutapa? It got written out. Let me show you how. First, the physical evidence. Many of the stone structures that would have proven Mutapa's sophistication were either destroyed, neglected, or attributed to non-African builders. For decades, even into the 20th century, European archaeologists insisted that Great Zimbabwe and related sites must have been built by Phoenicians, Arabs, or some other more advanced civilization. Why? Because the alternative was too threatening to colonial narratives. If Africans built this, if Africans created this, if Africans organized this, then what justified European rule? Second, the documents. Much of what the Portuguese recorded about Mutapa stayed locked in Portuguese archives. It wasn't translated, it wasn't widely circulated. And when it was referenced, it was framed through colonial perspectives, primitive kingdoms that benefited from Portuguese contact. The original accounts, the ones that described Mutapa's sophistication, those got buried. Third, the renaming. Places got new names. Rivers, mountains, regions, all renamed in Portuguese or English. The geography itself was rewritten to erase indigenous identity.
How Egypt first name was Kemet, and they renamed it Egypt because Kemet means land of the blacks. So if it's the land of the blacks, like I showed you in a previous video, a Black American that is related to Ramses III, when they describe Ramses III, he's described as at 60. He was tall, muscular. When have you ever seen a 60-year-old tall, muscular Arab? Think about it.
And fourth, maybe most importantly, the story itself got simplified. In popular consciousness, African history became Egypt, then a gap of thousands of years, then colonization. Everything in between, ignored, dismissed as tribal or primitive or just not worth mentioning. But here's what that erasure does. When you remove a people's history, you remove their ability to claim a legacy. You remove their ability to point to ancestors who built, who governed, who traded, who created. You remove the foundation of identity, and that's not accidental. If you're going to justify colonizing a place, if you're going to justify extracting its resources, if you're going to justify treating its people as inferior, then you need them to believe they never had anything worth protecting. You need to erase their memory. Because a people who remember their power, they're dangerous. They might demand it back. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not claiming some grand conspiracy. I'm not saying a group of people sat in a room and decided to erase Mutapa specifically. But I am saying this. There were structural incentives to downplay African achievements. There were cultural biases that made European historians dismiss African civilizations. There were political reasons to keep these stories buried. And the result, intended or not, was erasure. So here's my question for you. How many other civilizations were written out of history? How many other empires, kingdoms, and cultures did we lose? Not because they disappeared, but because someone decided they weren't worth remembering. Let me know in the comments what other forgotten civilizations you think deserve more attention. But here's the thing about memory. It's resilient. You can erase the official records. You can destroy the monuments. You can rewrite the textbooks. But you can't erase people. And the descendants of Mutapa, they remember. In Zimbabwe and Mozambique today, oral traditions still tell stories of the great empire. Elders pass down legends of powerful kings, vast trade networks, and a time when their ancestors governed themselves.
The same way Black Americans, family, tell us who we are, what tribes we came from. See, The difference between Africans and Black Americans is we would never tell you who you are. Like those elders that you have over there that are still passing down this knowledge that is not in history books. If it's like that over there for you, what do you think they did to us over here? The difference between us and you is you worship these white people while we know who they are. Do we have some coons? Absolutely. But we deal with our coons accordingly.
Traditional ceremonies still honor the spirits of Mutapa runers. Cultural practices still echo the organizational systems of the old empire. The empire is gone, but its shadow remains.
This is why history is so important. To understand your future, you must know your past. This is why, in our process of delineation, you'll notice Puerto Ricans try to take credit for the creation of hip hop until we stood on business. Jamaicans, they also try to take partial credit. We cannot allow these other cultures to infiltrate our community and come as friends. And sometimes not even pretending to be friends, but they come into your community. We have to continue to stand on business, delineate, and support each other. To the next one. Peace.